So our objectives, and this is the auto test. So when you get your EtherScope nXG, one of the first things you're going to do is run an auto test with it. So we're going to talk about why do we run the auto test first. We're going to go through creating a basic auto test, running a wired auto test, creating a basic Wi-Fi auto test, and running that Wi-Fi auto test. So let's take a look at our auto tests here. So wired and Wi-Fi port connectivity. So just to go over again, because this is a very, very important distinction. We have our wired port up here on the top. We have our management port up down here. The management port, when we plug that in, goes out and gets an IP address, and away it goes. The wired port, not necessarily. In fact, to connect the wired port, our wired test port up here, or our Wi-Fi port to the network, we need to run an auto test first. So in this case, when I plug this in, it goes out, gets an address, connects up, away we go. Up here, this port does not link to the network until we run an auto test on it. Okay? So what we find is that the auto test, by running that, allows us to go in and connect our EtherScope nXG up to do discovery, performance testing, ping tests, things like that. With the Wi-Fi port, an auto test is not required for discovery. It automatically goes out and starts scanning the network. In fact, if we come in here, you'll notice that it's kind of small, but in the upper left-hand corner, our channel number is going. That is our Wi-Fi port going out, scanning the network, looking for wireless devices out there. But if we want to connect up and get an IP address, we're going to have to set up an auto test and connect that Wi-Fi port up. So let's go through how we set up an auto test in here. And we would do that by tapping on the app. So this is another important concept with the EtherScope nXG. And that is that we have a variety of apps on this platform. Great thing is that as apps come out, we can add those apps on here. So these are the apps that we have today. We're going to go through a few of these. But we go in and we will start an app. We will then configure that app, then we'll run it. And we're going to see that for most of these, we can go in and save that configuration. So now if I'm going from client site to client site or facility to facility or application to application, I can save those settings specific to that application. So this way I don't have to go back and recreate those. It also makes it nice that if I have more junior technicians going out and doing this, that we can create those profiles. They can then go out and run those and show us what those test results are. Okay. So we're going to start with the wired profile. So in this case, I'm going to come in and I'm going to go to AutoTest. When I go to AutoTest, what I see is that I have 3 default auto tests in here. I've got my wired profile, my air quality, and my Wi-Fi. So if I go to my wired profile, I can start going in and configuring this. So I'll click on that wired profile, and then I want to go in and configure that. Now, in most cases, I could just click on this and run it. But I may want to go in and set something like a VLAN tag. And this is where I can tag those packets. I can connect to VLANs. It supports 802.1q VLAN tagging. So in that case, I can come in here and click on my settings. So I'll tell you what, let's go over here and we will do that on our live EtherScope. So I'm going to click on AutoTest. And here it's run that profile already. And we're going to touch on this, but this is one that is a really, really important thing to remember. And that is we have this green link right here. Now that green link tells us that that port is linked up to the network. Once we are linked up to the network, we can use that wired port for testing. If we do not have a link on there, we cannot use the wired port for testing. So if I need to have an IP address, if I need to be connected to the network, I need to have that link in there. Now I'm going to click on that wired profile. And we can come up here to settings. And this is where we can go through our various settings. Now, we're going to go through more advanced settings a little bit later in the presentation. But what I'd like to do is just come in and we could say, well, what do we do in here? Well, I'm going to click on AutoTest. And a few things I like to do is give that profile a name. We can create as many wired and wireless profiles as we want. You are not going to run out of space on this. You could create profiles that have specific VLAN tags. You could create profiles that look for PoE. You could create profiles that have certain test targets they're looking for. You could have profiles that use 802.1x. You could have ones that have static IP addresses. So what I like to do is make sure that I give my profile a descriptive name. There's another term that I'm going to be using as we go through the presentation today, and that is deselect, don't delete. What we're going to find is that as we're grouping different things together, test targets, AutoTest profiles, we can group these and we can take profiles we've already created and group those together into a unique collection. So I kind of think of this like having a library of tests where I can draw from that library. But if you go in and you delete one of those auto tests, it will delete it from every AutoTest profile group that it is referenced. So it could be that you had built a profile group and you didn't think you needed that anymore, but you decided to go in and delete it. That could affect profile groups that maybe somebody else created on the EtherScope. So I'm a big fan. You're not going to run out of space of deselecting, but not deleting those. Leave them out there unless you're absolutely sure you're not going to use those anymore. So in this case, one of the things I like to do, I like to give this thing a name because I want to make sure that when I go to use this profile, I know what that profile is doing. So I'm going to call this native VLAN. So we're not going to set any VLAN tag in here. We're not going to do PoE. We're just going to say that this is a native VLAN test. And we're going to leave all the other parameters default. We're not going to do PoE. We're going to get a DHCP address. We're just going to test the test target that comes as a default in there. So we're going to go in and we're going to set that to native VLAN. And we're going to run that test. So I just go down here, down at the bottom of the screen. I hit back. That takes me back, and now I'm going to hit start. So this is going to go out and run this test. Now, the first thing it's going to do is it's going to link up to the network. And it tells me that the switch I'm connected to is advertising 10100 gig. The value in bold right here, that tells us that we connected at gig, and that's great because if it told me it could advertise gig and we connected at 100, I need to go back and take a look at my cabling to find out why did I not connect at gig. Now for each one of these test results that we see in here, we can click on that and it will show us detailed information about that. So what type of signaling, what did it, that said it could do 10100 gig, it could do half or full duplex, everything looks good there. I can always tap on that back button down there to go back. It shows me which switch I connected to and the port on that switch. So in this case, it's giving me my LLDP information, it's giving me my contact information, my location, MAC address, IP address. There was a case where I was out at a client site and their wiring closet had gotten so hot that the labels fell off the switches. So there's a pile of labels on the switches that have IP addresses, and they had no idea what the IP address is of the switch. So they started grabbing a console cable, and they started trying to find a PC that they could plug that into. I said, oh, wait. All you have to do, plug the EtherScope into the switch, and it will tell you the IP address of the switch if you're running CDP or LLDP. Plugged it in, there's the IP address. We're able to connect right in and make our configuration changes. So being able to get this information out of that switch, really powerful thing. Shows us our DHCP information. So in this case, I can see who provided my DHCP address. How long did it take? The offer, the acknowledgement, the total time. I can even scroll down here and it graphs that out for me. So I can see what is being offered. And I'll tell you what, if we can't measure it, we can't troubleshoot it. So I need to know, am I getting a secondary DHCP offer? Am I seeing something where, in this case, I'm not? But what happens if I have two DHCP servers on my network? That could be a rogue device. Somebody brought in an access point, somebody brought in a little router to give themselves some more switch ports, and they're handing out 192.168.1 addresses and goofing everything up. So being able to, in my AutoTest, to see that information, really nice. I can see my DNS information. So in this case, it tells me that my bind 9 DNS servers providing my, it doesn't tell me bind 9 on there, I know that, but it tells me that it's providing that. My secondary DNS, everything worked good there. And I got to my default router. So this all looks good. And in fact, it looks so good that we get no errors, no warnings up here at the top, and we get our link. So now our wired port is linked to the network. We're going to be using the 10.0.117 or 11.117 IP address to communicate with anything using that wired port. So boom, we're connected up and we're ready to go on the wired side. And that's really all there is to it in most cases. But it is really important that if you want to use that wired port for communicating with routers, switches, doing performance tests, you need to go in and run this auto test to link it to the network. Okay, so there's that little link right there. That's what we want to see. So that way we know that we are linked up. Okay, now we can use that wired port for doing discovery, performance testing, ping, TCP, all of those. So let's jump over and take a look at our Wi-Fi auto test. So how do we use that to go in and connect up? Now, this is going to take a little bit more work because we have to give it an SSID and we have to give it a passphrase if that's what we're using, or credentials in there. So tests that require an IP address on the Wi-Fi side. I told you that the Wi-Fi will go in and do a discovery of the network, even if we don't link to anything. But if I want to be able to send IP traffic through that Wi-Fi port, I have to run the auto test. So we would do this for active testing, where we're sending SNMP queries, where we're doing ping, TCP port connectivity, path analysis, or I want to do an iPerf test. So here's the thing. If I have something like the test accessory, which we have right here, a little PoE powered device. We'll talk about that when we get to iPerf. Or I have an iPerf server out there. In fact, here, we've got my little Raspberry Pi right there. We can run iPerf 3 on that. So we can have an iPerf server out there that we're talking to. So now I can walk around with my EtherScope nXG and do throughput tests to find out what my throughput looks like from various locations. Okay. All right, so one of the questions, is that also on the Link Runner G2, Wi-Fi AutoTest? It's not. So on our Link Runner G2, what we've got is we've got the wired auto test, and it's going to look a lot like the auto test we see on here. We don't have the Wi-Fi auto test because we don't have a Wi-Fi network port on that. So what you can think of is that the EtherScope nXG is like if we took the AirCheck G2, the Link Runner G2, the One Touch back there, and some of the OptiView XG, and we shoved that all into one box, and we made it smaller than the One Touch and the OptiView. That's what you've got, is you've got all of that capability in this EtherScope nXG. Okay. All right, so in this case, if we come over here to our Wi-Fi profile, say we're going to go ahead and configure that up. So what I'm going to do is tap on that little settings icon, the upper corner. So this is where we can start configuring some of those things. So just like our wired profile, we're going to give this a useful name. So let's come over here. I'm going to back up. I go to my Wi-Fi profile. I go to my settings. And I'm going to go to my profile name. We're going to call this OfficeNet. I'll say OK. We'll just keep up with this side. And again, you can download when you got your confirmation for the webcast. There should have been a link in there to tell you where you can download the PowerPoint or the PDF that goes with the PowerPoint, so that you've got all of these. And if you didn't get that, let me know and I'll put it in the chat window and you can make sure you can download that. So now I come into my Wi-Fi connection, because really the only other thing we need in here is to specify our Wi-Fi connection information. So I'm going to go ahead and tap on SSID. Now we can type in an SSID. So if you have a network that is not beaconing, we could type in that network. We could also come in here and select one of these networks that we see. Now, if I start typing, what it's going to do is it's going to filter down on those networks that match that text. Now, in this case, I want to connect to the Netgear 77 5G network. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select that network right there. Again, I could have typed that in if it's not beaconing, or if it's within range, I can go ahead and just select that from my list. I just start typing in the first few letters of the network name, and it will filter that down so I don't have to go through potentially a long list. I'm not close to a lot of other businesses out here where I'm at, but if you were in the middle of a metropolitan area, you might find that you get a lot of networks that show up in there. So I'll hit OK. So now I need to give it a password. And in this case, I like all of you, but giving you my password, maybe a little bit more than I want to do. So we are going to hit delete on there. We're going to come over here. Let's just maximize that. I'm going to come over and type that in on the EtherScope. All right. So we've got that in there. So I've entered my passphrase, my password in there. I've got my SSID. And again, we're just going over this very quickly on how to do a basic auto test. In a more advanced end of it, we could come in and select which BSSID, which AP we want to connect to. Really handy feature if we want to know, is that AP working? Because when we go to connect, we're going to send out a probe, and we're going to get probe responses. We're going to select the BSSID based on those probe responses. But I want to make sure that one is working. So in that case, we could select the BSSID and connect to that specific AP. Okay. Now, in my case, I'm using WPA2. If you're using WPA Enterprise and you need to import a certificate, you can import that certificate from the SSID card, or the micro SSD card. There is no SSID card. So we put in our passphrase. Okay. Now, I'll hit back. And that is all I'm going to do. Now, if I needed to put in a static IP, I could do things like put in a static IP. I could configure the rest of this. All I want to do with this one is show you how we connect up here. Okay, so I'm going to come back. We'll hit back. And I'm going to hit start. So what are we seeing here? We are going out, we're connecting to OfficeNet. I gave it a descriptive name. Why? Because I may want to use this profile again. And I could put a name in there that makes it really easy to go out and grab that. And I'm going to keep hammering on this because it's such an important piece. And that is, as you're going through and building those profiles, iPerf, AutoTest, Discovery, give them names that make sense to you. because now you're building your tool set. NetAlly is giving you a platform and some apps. What you're going to do is you are going to build customized tools on your EtherScope nXG that will allow you to go in and quickly and effectively troubleshoot your network. So that is what we're doing right here. So as we build these profiles, don't build one profile and keep using it over and over again. Build multiple profiles, and you'll see when we get down here a little bit why that is so nice and makes things so much faster. So now, hey, we're connected. OfficeNet, everything connected. We got our link. We are linked on the wireless test port. It shows us right here, Netgear 77 5G. We're connected at 1.1 gigabits. In fact, if I expand that, this shows me all this phenomenal information. It gives me the AP information about where we're connected. It tells us what our signal looks like, shows us what our PHY rate is. So now you could walk around with this. This is being updated in real time, and that window will show you the last 24 hours. And you can see right here that we've got a little slider. We can scale in, scale out. So I can take a look at 100% of that time. I can take a look at a very short period of time. So we can slide that slider around, drill in and see what's happening. But what does my connection speed look like as I walk around? So it's telling me my PHY rate, my max, the percent of the PHY rate. So, where am I at? There's a lot of things we could get into. Well, I can't help it. I got to click on connection log. There's our connection log. This shows us our connection. So I was downtown Seattle troubleshooting a problem, and they said on our guest wireless, we keep disconnecting. What's going on? People connect and disconnect. What we saw was when we went in and looked at the log, we could see as soon as we connected, it said a D off. So it said, hey, I'll connect you. You can connect up. Come on, join our network. You join on, it says, get out of here. And it would knock us off the network. So by being able to go into the log, we could see that we were being dropped because of the D off. It wasn't a mistake. It was very intentional on the part of the AP. Went back to the vendor, found out that there was a firmware issue, upgraded the firmware, no more D off. But it gave us the definitive results of what was going on in there. So now we've gone in, we've connected up. I could come in here and like put my hands over the top of that just to see if we could change what our data rate is. Okay. So we can see we've got a pretty good connection right there. All right, so let's go back. We're connected up on the wireless. So that's how we go in and run a wired AutoTest and a Wi-Fi AutoTest. And these are the basis of what we're going to work off of from here. We want to use either the wired network port or the wireless network port. We've got to run these AutoTests first. So notice we have two green links right there. So our two green links show us that we are linked up at both on our wired and our wireless connection. So when we come in, we're now linked up, we're ready to go. So there's our link. We're linked up to the network. So now we're all linked up. We've got both our OfficeNet and our native VLAN connected. We're ready to go and move on to discovery.